She had just dropped her 5-year-old son at school when she heard the first blast. Linda Solomon is a New York Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist and editor-in-chief of the Vancouver Observer. She lived 15 blocks from what is now known as Ground Zero. We hear why, after 9/11, she walked away from her hip Manhattan life to start anew in Canada. Well, it's good to be here with you today and with award-winning investigative journalist Linda Solomon. She grew up in a politically charged family. From the time she could walk, she was put to work in political campaigns. Along the way, she discovered the power of the pen to change minds and lives. Many news assignments later, she is the founder and currently editor-in-chief of the Vancouver Observer, and other things, I'm sure. Hello.
Hi, Fanny.
Take me back to your beginnings. Born in Tennessee, Chattanooga?
Born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, on the buckle of the Bible Belt. My family was really involved in the civil rights movement, and my parents were very political, and I grew up in a household where we were told being involved was the most important thing. You have to always be involved to protect democracy.
And so the talk around the dinner table at the Solomon house was, or were you Solomons? Because
we were Solomons.
Okay. You know, people get married and change names.
We were Solomons, and we were, the talk was about politics, the talk was about justice, the talk was about the kinds of violence going on in the South at the time. My father owned the movie theaters. And I remember when he showed one of the first films to have an African-American in it, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Sidney Poitier.
Sidney Poitier. And somebody put a rattlesnake in the theater. And everyone, you know, ran out in terror because that was the kind of racism that existed at the time. It's really hard to even, you know, remember how intense those days were, how polarized racially.
Yes, and still is a little bit in some places.
Yes. Yes.
We had a discussion at our dinner table the other night about being born in America, or North America, really. Would you like to be born black, yellow, red, white?
In North America? Yeah. Well, I've always kind of wished I were brown. Because of the...
Because you don't wrinkle as much, right?
You don't wrinkle as much, and you don't have to worry as much about getting sunburned as I do, being very white. But I think that, you know, to be born a white, privileged North American is, you know, you're born into one of the most privileged groups in the world.
Margaret Wente of the Globe and Mail wrote a column the other day, and she said, at our house, we say something that's almost politically incorrect. We call it, if somebody's whining about nothing, we say, that's a white people problem.
Right, right,
and,
I heard that.
It's like, oh, we ran out of Starbucks at the cottage.
Yes.
And she'll say, that's a white people's problem. If you're a brown people, maybe you don't have clean water or access to clean water, you don't have food.
Yeah.
You could get raped in the night and no one would care. You could be a girl and not get educated. That's a brown people problem.
Yes, and at the time I was growing up, well, my parents really believed that it was their duty. It was you know, that was their passion to make things more equal, and you know, things were so there was so much injustice, and you know, there's still a time when black people went to theaters over here and white people over here, and my father was in the middle of changing all that, and you know, it was scary. And I also remember as a little girl picking up the telephone in the middle of the night and hearing a voice saying a very harsh swear word for a child to hear, and then an epithet, you know, something about me, Jews. We were Jewish, and so, you know, there was a lot of
intolerance.
Intolerance, religious.
To say the least.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Your first political campaign, officially?
My first political campaign was for Albert Gore Sr.
Really?
I think I was about 8 years old, and I have a photograph of myself standing outside a polling place wearing a hat that says Gore around it. And yeah, my parents were really involved in his senatorial election, and I knew Albert Gore, congressman, as a young congressman, because we both started out at the same newspaper, which was the Tennessean in Nashville. And that was his first job, and it was also my first job.
And you went on to work for Jimmy Carter and others.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, first job, Tennessean. Why writer for you? What was it? What triggered it?
What triggered it was the Watergate hearings. Watching Carl Bernstein and Woodward and Bernstein take down President Nixon. You know, at the time we were all just horrified by what Nixon was doing, and you know, there was the Vietnam War, and things were really politically tumultuous. And here come these two young journalists who, you know, more than have this power to take down.
And the drama
president.
and the deep throat.
The drama,
and all the
deep
president's
throat,
men
yes.
and what was really going on and where is the truth.
Yes.
But
and
the
so,
power of bringing a president down by writing
yes.
something.
That was just amazing to watch. And I was part of a whole generation of journalists that were inspired by Woodward and Bernstein. And, you know, it really became a calling to, you know, it was a passion and a calling, not just a career.
So from the Tennessean to?
From the Tennessean to I freelanced for the International Herald Tribune. I lived in Paris. I wrote some for the LA Times. I wrote for magazines like the New Reader and New Age Journal.
So, and you studied a little mysticism along the way?
A little
Tripped
mysticism.
about? Did you?
I did. I did a lot of yoga. I explored meditation. But I always came back to journalism.
Well-rounded, political.
Right.
And the keys to investigative journalism, then and now. Then, a good story, the right story, the facts.
Yes, but I think the keys to investigative journalism are going deeply into a story, being really unfettered in your desire to get to the bottom of it, to present the facts, and to tell a story that has a deep human quality.
When you were in New York, there was a story told, a tragic story, 9/11. Tell me about that experience for you.
That experience was just so shocking and, you know, yet really mundane as well. It happened right in my neighborhood, you know, like to all the people I was involved with. I had just dropped my then 5-year-old son off to kindergarten when I was standing with a group of parents talking, and we heard the first explosion. And from there, you know, everything in the city began to fall apart.
But what did you think it was? Do you remember?
You hear a lot of explosions in New York City. You hear a lot of loud sounds, but this one was extraordinarily loud. And we all just stopped for a moment. And again, it's rare in New York City that anything can stop you that way. We stopped talking, but then we returned to talking. So it still wasn't enough to make us just go, oh my God, you know. But I didn't know what it was. I just noted that it was really, really loud. And then I got on the bus, and people were just, you know, talking, and all of a sudden someone was on her cell phone, and she put it down, and she looked around at all the people on the bus, and she said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And we all just sat there for a moment. And then we went on. And then a bus driver, we stopped at the next bus stop. A bus driver leaned in and he said to the bus driver, that was a 747 that hit the World Trade Center.
Not a Cessna.
Yeah, the first thought was it was a small plane, this happens, big deal. And then I looked up outside the bus and I could see the mushroom, you know, this huge cloud coming from the World Trade Center. And in that moment, I knew that everything had changed. You know, it was just such a deep knowing that nothing was going to be the same now.
Intuitively.
Yeah.
And your son was still at school?
My son was still at school, and I still didn't really know what had happened. So I got to West Broadway, which is where I lived, and it also is the street that ended at the World Trade Center. And I got off the bus, and I looked down at the World Trade Center, and I could see flames coming out of the top of it. But still, you know, there were emergency vehicles going down. There was still the enormity of it hadn't sank in. So I went to get a cup of coffee at my regular place, and the guy who owned the coffee shop had pulled the gate down, and he was just sitting there looking stunned. And people were talking, and the plane had just flown over, the second plane had just flown over that street very low. And so they were all really scared. You know, that had terrified them. And at that point, I knew something really wrong was happening.
Now, there was the mother in you talking, but there was the journalist in you.
Well, at that point, I went home, turned on the television, saw the BBC, and, you know, heard the second plane had gone into the tower. And I think by that point, the Pentagon had been hit too. And it was like, oh my God, we're at war. Where's my child? And I was also pregnant.
That too.
Yes,
so
I was 4 months pregnant with my second child.
Vulnerable, wondering where your child is. A husband in the mix?
Yes. He was way uptown, which was like another world. People uptown really didn't have the same immediate experience.
Right.
Or realize. It took them a while to realize what had happened, longer.
And post 9/11, you went through much of the trauma. I know that so many did. And one day or 1 week, you decided to
after it
leave
happened,
your birthplace, go north?
After 9/11, the air was so toxic in our neighborhood. You know, it was full of like the PCBs, the asbestos, you know, from the building. The building had literally dissolved. And not only were there, you know, all the people that had died, the airplanes, the machines, you know, it was just a toxic brew that you can't imagine. And it would waft over to Brooklyn if the air shifted that way, and then the air would shift back to us, and we couldn't breathe. We literally couldn't breathe. And so I was asking my doctors, like, is it okay for a pregnant woman to breathe this air? And their answer was, yes, the EPA says it's fine. As a journalist of, at that point, many years, I just said, this is not true. This can't be true. You know, it didn't make any sense. I knew what asbestos was. I knew what PCBs were. So it was, you know, about a month later that we decided to just get out of it. And my brother lived in Vancouver already. And we went to, and also we had been going to Cortez Island for summers up north.
Right.
And so we decided to just go to Cortez Island and have a break.
Which is a far cry from New York. And then you wrote a wonderful, was it a book or an article about why I love Vancouver? I read an article you wrote about why I love Vancouver. I don't know if you turned it into a book.
I read a book. I'm sorry, I wrote a book. What I really did was start the Vancouver Observer. After being on Cortez for a while, it was like, oh my God, I'm really an urban animal. This is wonderful, it's beautiful, but it doesn't work for me. Right. So came to Vancouver and just was absolutely in love with the city. You know, it was like being on Cortez those years and then back in an urban setting, and such a beautiful one. So I started the Vancouver Observer, and I began writing, you know, just about my experiences in Vancouver. And at a certain point, I pulled those together into a book because, you know, with a website, it's hard to really dig into all the depth of stuff there.
And now online publishing is your thing.
Yes.
I would suggest. Not that you don't write for newspapers occasionally, but online publishing it is. When we come back, we'll talk about the differences.
Great.
And how you inspire and how you investigate, all of the above. We'll return with award-winning investigative journalist Linda Solomon after the break.